joining us now on the Boardwalk kind of hotline. You can follow him on Twitter at Kevin_Kinkead. His bio refers to him as the managing editor, a.k.a. lead blogger for Crossing Broad. But I refer to Kevin as Sixers writer and man who can talk about literally anything. Joins us on the Boardwalk kind of hotline. Kevin, how you doing?
Good, Josh. What's going on? Are you wearing your underwear over your face right now?
No, okay. So I guess you didn't hear the end of that story. So after that came out the other day, someone who actually was listening to the station, who works in the medical field, actually came to the building and gave me a mask.
Oh, there you go. Well, look, then we've got to the end goal of what we were trying to achieve. It was just a little bit of a roundabout way, but we did what we needed to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm trying to be safe. I'm trying to be responsible, and someone had a little belief and pity on me, and they had decided to help out a little bit.
Well, there you go. And I can't fault you for just wanting to take the proper precautions. So who am I?
Well, listen, I had to go to the store.
Anybody for putting it?
I had to go to the store, and the order in New Jersey is if you're not wearing a mask, they can kick you out. So.
It's like the guy who got tossed off the SEPTA bus yesterday for not wearing the mask. I think that had something. I logged back onto the Crossing Broad Facebook page this morning. I think it had like 250,000 impressions or something like that, because that's what everybody was talking about. The policy that I guess they canceled the policy. Like they started it on Thursday, enforced it yesterday, and then they said, okay, this is not going well. So I think they went away from that. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting scene in the South Jersey and Philadelphia region right now.
Well, speaking of scenes, so there are a couple of Sixers things I wanted to ask you about, and some other things we'll get to as well. But I wanted to start out with this. So obviously we all saw the story that came out several days ago about the Knicks would be interested in Elton Brand if Elton Brand was fired, which is similar to like the guy who always tells the girl, if your boyfriend ever cheats on you, I'll be here to catch you if you fall, kind of thing. So whatever. But I thought the interesting follow-up was last night when I saw the Woj report that one of the candidates for the Bulls GM opening is Mark Eversley. So, Kevin, I'm curious to ask you the question I asked the audience earlier, which is, do we look at these people who are interested in Sixers executives as a sign that the Sixers have quality people in their front office, or is it just a byproduct of these are bad teams, they'll take whatever they can get?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think my first response to that was not only with the Elton Brand stuff, with the Brian Colangelo story that came out, the fact that anybody would interview him ever. And you hear a lot of this narrative of like, well, some of the people who were on Brian Colangelo's team are left over in the Sixers front office, Eversley being one of them. So, I thought there was enough residual toxicity left over from the Burnergate saga that nobody would touch Brian Colangelo for a long time. And maybe that extended to the people who were like around him, who were underneath him when he worked here in Philadelphia. But I don't know. I guess that's not the case. Although to your point, yeah, I mean, it's just one team that's being linked to these guys, the Bulls, and the Bulls haven't exactly had their stuff together over the last couple of years. So it's hard to say. But yeah, I found that the Elton Brand thing interesting because I don't really know what you're evaluating him on. I mean, like there's not enough even of a sample size of things that he's done that would relate to what the Knicks' job is specifically. Like general managers in basketball, it's different than other sports because they kind of have a specific job or a specific thing that they're trying to execute. Sam Hinkie was in here just tearing it down and compiling assets. Brian Colangelo was the link from the process era to trying to turn it around and win. And Elton Brand came in as an inexperienced GM who was just, tasked basically to burn through those assets and trade for everybody and try to win now. So I don't think that Elton Brand is what the Knicks need. The Knicks are kind of like in this purgatory where they're not really winning, but they're not really losing. So they're more closer on the Hinkie side of the spectrum than the Elton Brand side of the spectrum, I think.
Yeah, the other thing is that listen, I'm fully admitting this. I'm not going to act like I have any full knowledge of exactly how one guy gets a job interview instead of another guy, outside of the fact that I'm assuming that people develop relationships and people, call each other and say, who do you recommend? Because a guy like Mike Zarin, that dude's been in the Celtics front office for, I feel like, 20 years, working as the assistant GM and the team's lawyer. And he's been up for jobs and interviewed, and he hasn't gotten any. So, who am I to really say that Mark Eversley and Elton Brand are really valuable candidates? Because there are dudes around the league, like what's his name, Harris, who works out in Golden State. He used to be the Bucks GM. Now he's working in the Warriors front office, but he hasn't gotten a new job. What is really the definition of what is a good front office executive?
Yeah, it's hard. It depends on what you're looking for. Again, you could call up Brett Brown and say, "Hey, tell me about Mark Eversley," and he would say, "Well, when I was the interim GM for whatever, he was great." It's maybe because of the Brett Brown thing and the Brian Colangelo thing, and Elton Brand kind of coming in as just a figurehead, really. Maybe those guys maybe people know internally that those guys had more control and more influence than the average, vice president or like number 2 or number 3 guy or something like that. But unless you're fed morsels or unless stuff gets out into the public about this guy scouted this specific guy or this guy picked this specific guy, then it's always going to be impossible for us in the media or us as fans to kind of judge accurately what they can be attributed to them and what can't be. You'd need to sniff it'd have to be like an Eagles thing. Like Joe Douglas suggested that that Howie Roseman go out and draft this guy, and then you can say, okay, well, we can attribute that one thing to him. But yeah, it's morsels otherwise. It's just a lot of internal communication. Hey, give me a recommendation on this guy. Tell me about this guy, and we'll go from there. Because, you don't hear a lot of stories in the NBA of like, this guy recommended that they take Steph Curry at number 8 overall.
Right.
And so it's like kind of impossible for us to like parse it down otherwise.
Well, speaking of Joe Douglas, even when we do hear like the story that the rumor is that Joe Douglas told Howie Rose from the draft Donnell Pumphrey, but yet no one holds that against him. So even when a guy makes a bad recommendation, how do we even weigh that?
Well, no, and it always comes down to, and then the blame always goes to the person on the top by default, because it's all under their control anyway. So, you have a lot of guys who are taking the fall for things that they maybe didn't do. And that's just how the cookie crumbles. That's just how it goes. It was easier, when I covered the Philadelphia Union and Chester, it was a little bit easier to do because, they would break up their executives and they'd send them on like international scouting trips and stuff like that. So if you were able to get those nuggets for other teams, it would be easier. But look, every NFL person with the Eagles is going to the Combine and is going to the Senior Bowl. Every Sixers person is out at Summer League or the draft camps or stuff like that, or, keeping track of AAU ball. And so it's harder for, when you're in a centralized domestic kind of thing, it's just harder to kind of say like, this guy definitely did this and this guy definitely did that. It'd be like somebody calling me and say, hey, recommend Josh for, this job or whatever, and I could do it internally, sure. But they also have hours and hours of you and Mike and everybody talking on the air. So it's just a different world.
Kevin Kinkead, Crossing Broad, joining us here on 97.3 ESPN. Kevin, the other Sixers thing that came to my mind this week was, so I wasn't originally planning on this, but I ended up watching a majority of the replay of the Heat Spurs games on ESPN the other night. And I started thinking deeper about this, and that is because, when we have more of our own spare time, new ideas generate, right? And I'm watching this game and I'm thinking, there hasn't been a team that's won the NBA title in the last 20 years that couldn't play defense, that didn't sacrifice, that didn't have players that went above and beyond. And this Sixers team started the year playing defense. We all hear about the bully ball and everything. Then all of a sudden they got away from it, and it seemed like they just became indifferent to playing defense at times. And at some point I'm kind of wondering, maybe if this team would have just stuck to the formula that got them through those first 5 or 10 games, maybe they wouldn't have such a bad road record, or maybe they would be a little bit more of a cohesive unit, or heck, maybe Sixer fans would complain a little bit less about Embiid and Simmons. Who knows, right?
Yeah, and that's the reason why I wasn't as down on the Sixers as everybody else, as whenever they played last month, 1 month ago today. Because they would have been a tough out in the playoffs because they can turn up the defense whenever they want. How many times did we watch games this year where it was kind of close, teams were kind of like hanging around, And then Ben Simmons would just like crank the defense from 10 to 11 with like 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, pick off a steal, go dunk the ball, they'd go on like a 6-0 run, and then it would be over. And, obviously teams aren't playing like that for 82 games. But when it's in the playoffs and it matters, yeah, they can crank the defense up to 12, 13, 14, and they're going to be doing it more consistently. So that's why I was sitting here thinking, like, look, I know everybody's down on them, and the half-court offense is just kind of whatever, and the fit with Al Horford and the spacing is not fantastic right now. But this team, when they're dialed in, can play defense as good as anybody in the NBA, and they're huge. The length, the stuff that we saw them doing at the beginning of the season, where they were limiting opponent field goals, and they were just out-voluming other teams. They were shooting like 10 more shots than the other team. That's the kind of stuff that they would have been able to do in the playoffs, crank up the defense if they can get enough decent half-court possessions. I wouldn't want to play the Sixers in a 3-6 game,
Why do you think the team got away from playing some of that defense? Was that just, guys maybe just, the length of the season, they're just tired and bored, or, is that a chemistry thing? Like, where do you put your finger on? Because I feel like this team is capable of playing high-level defense every game, and there are some games you watch them and you'll be like, bro, where's the defense?
Yeah, I don't know. Motivation, consistency, travel. It's hard to bring that effort every single night when you're in 3 different cities and 4 different nights. And the other thing, too, is, offense affects defense as well. When you miss a shot, you got to scramble back to transitional defense. Brett Brown calls it miss defense. And then when you make a shot, they got to inbound the ball from under the basket. You can get back and get set up. So that's make defense. So you're wearing yourself out and you're missing these shots. You're playing transitionally. You're getting cross-matched and you're trying to cover guys as you move down the court. Whereas you make a couple shots to build up a lead, you can kind of take your foot off the gas a little bit, get back, get set, go over top of screen, funnel guys in towards Joel Embiid and, let team shoot 3-pointers and miss. And, a lot of it is affected by things on the other end. But yeah, it's just look, you can't expect these guys to go out in game number 54 and they're on night 4 of a West Coast road trip and they're going to play as hard on defense as they would in game 1 of the season. It's just not realistic when you have a season that's that long.
Speaking of there not being a season right now, I want to know from you because, I feel like I'm getting like a lot of mixed reviews on this. So, the NBA 2K apparently is doing well enough on the TV ratings that they're considering continuing this players tournament beyond the quarantine. That this will be something we'll be seeing on TV long into the future. And of course, they have the horse competition tomorrow. So, where do you stand on the NBA Players 2K tournament and the horse competition for content on TV?
I don't care at one bit. Not at all. My interest level in that stuff is like negative 50, honestly. I just want to see like real basketball again. I don't like take that the wrong way. I'm happy that they're being creative and they're finding things to do here, and we're all kind of bending over backwards to try to make things interesting and give fans something that they want. But when I hear these people come out and saying, "Well, say goodbye to the season," or "We're not going to play again until 2021," or "We're not going to do this," like what the hell is the point of that? Like, why would people even say that in the first place? First of all, you don't know. Number 2, what are we in a hurry to do here? Like, we're going to cancel the season just so we can get to next season? Like, if they got to go to, like, I'll just pick an arbitrary date here. If they got to go to October 1st and they can't play basketball until October 1st, I would pick up the season right there, or I would play the playoffs there. Because I don't Lakers and the Bucks who are having fantastic seasons to just say, that's it, you're done. And I'm not interested in regular season next year. I would rather finish this and crown a champion and then cut regular season games off the beginning of next season and just play a shortened season next season. Because I want the NBA championship. I want the playoffs. I don't need the Sixers versus the Hornets game 17 in November. Like, that doesn't matter compared to crowning a champion this year.
Well, also, let's not overlook the fact, and this is maybe not the sexiest point of this all, but, this has been brought up by other people, so this is not an original idea by my part, but it's been brought up by multiple people that these TV contracts are billions of dollars. So, there is an incentive for these organizations, whether it's the NBA or Major League Baseball or even the NHL with their pathetic contract with NBC, to go out there and put something on TV because they're in the long run, going to make more money off of these games being on TV than they are with the fans in the stands anyway.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, like gate and, ticket revenue and stuff like that is nothing compared to what they're getting off these media deals. The Phillies are like the fourth highest, bringing the fourth most revenue just based off like TV and radio alone. So makes you wonder why they don't spend more money since they're that valuable. But that's another question for another time. But and like on another thing too, Josh, it's like, you look at people who are stuck in their houses right now, who are looking for sports, who are like kind of bummed out, just looking for something to do. Like you also have to kind of take into account like the collective mental health of the country right now. Sports is a release for people.
Yes.
And they don't have that right now. And so I think when you look at what like Dana White is trying to do with UFC or what Roger Goodell is trying to do with the NFL draft and insisting that it takes place, they understand that there's like an opportunity here to kind of give people something that they really want. And if they can do it in a safe and responsible way, then they're going to try to make it happen. And that's kind of, it goes to this idea of like, look, we want to get back to normalcy and we're looking for anything that we can do in that regard that's safe and responsible, So I don't blame them for acting the way that they are, and I don't really see the purpose of these people coming out like Kirk Herbstreit the other week saying like, well, I don't think we're going to have college football in the fall. Well, what does that do? That doesn't accomplish anything. I mean, you're just scaring people and you're making them even more depressed and sad when we're 6 months away from college football even starting anyway, and he doesn't know any better than anybody else. So I don't know why you would say something like that.
I'm so glad you brought that up because this has been a fight that I've been dealing with, I feel like, for 2 weeks now. And that is, number one, to me, and I'm not saying it's apples to apples because it's 100% not, but to me, the situation we're in right now reminds me of 9/11. The whole country shut down for a while. Like, people were panicked, people were scared, but that first baseball game, it's like people were given a new breath of life. And it was like sports did that for people. Sports gives us hope. Sports gives us something to look forward to. We can live through the athletes saying that tomorrow can be a better day. And the second thing is, like you said, I don't understand these people who are dwelling on doom and gloom. Like, I have a friend of mine, she's a single mom with 2 kids, and she messages me last weekend and she says, so I'm really scared now because someone who I thought was my friend told me that we're all going to get this virus and half of us are going to die. Like, why are people out here spreading this stuff to people? Like, why are this is ridiculous. Like, why can't everybody just, if you don't have something nice to say, just shut your mouth. And the people who have something nice to say, just try to, lift people up. Well,
and it's the thing too, is that there's a very thin line. Because look, we want people to take it seriously, obviously, so we want to have the requisite, tone and seriousness when we're talking about it, because we don't want people going around and sitting at the bar, with 15 other people. But there's also a thin line too, where if you go too far that and you just try to scare people too much, then they're not going to believe you or it's not going to resonate. There's a very thin line where you're not doing enough to get people to take this seriously versus going overboard. And like when Kirk Herbstreit comes out and says something like that, like I just don't really know what purpose it serves. I mean, you're just scaring people, you're just making them more upset. There's really nothing tangible that comes from it or useful. So I think people need to hold off and just say on these these absolutist kind of statements, because they really don't know. You bring up 9/11, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, like, it's apples and oranges with like a international war that resulted from a terrorist attack versus, a pandemic that still affects people here. But the idea is that you were saying we don't want this to change our way of life and who we are. So I think that's why people are looking at sports to like kind of bring us that normalcy, or, we're looking forward to our first baseball game, or we're looking forward to this or something like that. And it's important, again, from like a collective, like, mental health and cultural standpoint, like, this is what we are as Americans and this is what we're looking forward to. And, if we can do this in a responsible way that doesn't endanger anybody else, then I think it should probably be a priority for people like you and me who are not working in hospitals, who are not nurses, who are not doctors, but we're trying to do what we can in our respective fields to try to help out in other areas. I think it's important that we try to get sports back.
Speaking of getting sports back, you mentioned the union and MLS earlier, which leads me to a question I've been kind of pondering since the news came out with the XFL yesterday. They're basically shut down. It's done over. is there another sport that's going to have to, organizations have to shut down? Like, we know that the big four have billions of dollars, but like, what about the MLS? What about the WNBA? What about like a number 2 MMA organization like Bellator? What about other sports that, they don't have the billion-dollar contracts just rolling in the dough when they walk back onto the court or onto the field? What about these other sports?
Yeah, that's a good question. MLS should be okay because they're built in an NFL type of model. There's revenue sharing. It's a central closed, private setup. And, a bunch of the owners in MLS are still NFL owners. Bob Kraft, for example, is an MLS owner and an NFL owner. So that the money from these NFL guys will be fine if this thing drags out longer than we think. The WNBA is interesting. Bellator, because if UFC can't get going, then surely, these other little promotions aren't going as well. I'd have to know more about the individual, like, financial setup of all these places. But it did. Yeah, the XFL thing was kind of crazy, wasn't it? Because they were doing okay. The ratings were okay. The crowds were decent. They were 5 games in. They had an interesting undefeated team that was pretty fun to watch. They had some guys who were good enough to get signed by NFL teams, PJ Walker, So that's an interesting question. Yeah, I don't know. I think you might have given me a story idea for Monday, actually.
Well, please steal it, run with it, please, because I'll read that. Because I'm genuinely curious of how it's going to impact the other sports. Because MMA is my baby, for example. And I know a lot about the inner workings of that. And an organization like Bellator, I specifically bring up because they're technically owned by Viacom. And Viacom, which is technically, for those who don't know, CBS, well, the last time CBS owned a sports entity, they had to bail out as soon as possible, and they sold to George Steinbrenner, that being the New York Yankees. We saw Fox, when they owned the Dodgers, they bailed out as soon as they could. Media entities owning sports has always been a dicey situation, and I'm wondering, an environment like this, how does it affect the other sports? Like, the NBA loses money on the WNBA every year. That's like a commonly known thing. We know that golf is such a strange, outlier. It doesn't even count to be compared in the conversation. But, if the XFL, who had originally planned to survive for 3 years, is what Vince McMahon put aside all that money for, if they are getting impacted by this pandemic, what does that mean for other sports? And could it lead to a possibility that, we may get to a point where we may never see rivals of the big four again for a while?
Yeah, it's interesting. And, I was thinking, when Dana White tried to put UFC 249 on and tried to do everything he could do, they were going to do it at the Native American reservation in California.
Yep.
Like a week prior, we watched WrestleMania take place at an empty performance center in Orlando. And, UFC has a private facility in Las Vegas as well, and they originally were just going to move everything there. But then the Nevada State Athletic Commission said, we're not going to sanction any fights right now. So, I'm trying to sit here and think, like, what's the difference between WrestleMania doing something private in their facility versus UFC doing something private in their facility? There really isn't a ton of difference. You could make the argument that, look, if you do it at that private facility in Las Vegas or you do it at the reservation in California, what happens if a fighter breaks his arm and he has to go to the hospital after the fight? Like, can we justify sending a guy to the hospital for a broken arm that didn't need to happen when we could use every single available resource for the virus instead? I don't really know. That's a concern that somebody brought up. I watched UFC Fight Night a couple weeks ago that was scheduled for Brazil. They had it in an empty stadium or an empty arena in Brazil. Yep. So interesting too. And then you got Dianne Feinstein, and you got like senators who were coming in and getting involved. Gavin Newsom, there was a report that he told ESPN and Disney to tell UFC to shut it down. So, it gets weird because, then there's ramifications for that as well. If Bellator wants to come to Atlantic City, Governor Murphy might say, no, we can't justify this, because then if we allow this to happen, it makes us look like hypocrites because we're asking everybody else to stay home. So the whole thing from top to bottom is just a complete mess.
All right, Kevin, before I let you go, I have to know, without sports, what have you been consuming?
A lot of TV series. We've been watching Ozark, Tiger King. We still watch Walking Dead for some reason. I think just because I watched like the first 10 seasons, I feel like committed to it. Homeland's another one. I actually hooked up my PlayStation again. I got some high school buddies back on playing Rocket League. So we're just trying to do anything we can to keep afloat and keep our head above water. I started writing music again. So there you go. I mean, it shouldn't have to come down to a global pandemic for everybody to go back to their hobbies that they had from 10 years ago. But it's interesting to see like who's keeping themselves occupied versus who's really bored 4 weeks in,
So I will say that the show that I started, I'm almost done season 1, is Lucifer. So
okay.
That's the show. And part of it was because of the fact that I knew people who told me to watch it before. And I'm one of those people, Kevin, where like when it comes to television, I am not the trendy guy. So like I purposely haven't watched Game of Thrones because everyone else was watching it. Like I'm just that guy.
Yeah.
Whereas, Lucifer, because it has like a loose connection to other things I do watch, there was a curiosity thing with it. And I was like, all right, I'll give this a shot. And I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I'm kind of building a queue of things to watch right now that, I'll eventually get to because I got Netflix, I got Hulu, I got Disney Plus. So I got enough I can work with, right? But the problem is that because of the situation with HBO, and HBO is like they're still on cable, but they're not fully on cable, like those kind of things. I didn't have HBO most of my life, so when I did eventually get it, like I missed the boat on like a ton of things. So it's like
I see. Yeah.
So like now it's at the point where it's like, do I try to like dive back into something, and then the 30-day free HBO runs out?
Yeah, I hear you. Well, it's interesting too because obviously like NBC Sports Philadelphia and all these other places around here trying to show old games and just trying to fill programming with whatever they can, and those are fun for a little bit. I think I watched like one game, or they were showing the Sixers and Heat from 2 years ago playoff series. I rewatched a little bit of that, but that stuff gets old fast. I think just because what's going to happen, and it's like I think you get a little depressed too because you're watching it and you're like, oh, this is basketball. I wish we had like actual basketball that was happening now. So I think like there's kind of a shelf life on that, maybe diminishing returns on how many replays you can watch. I've noticed that replays that are older, like from the 90s and 80s, I've been having a better time watching those and stuff that happened like a year ago. But I don't know. Hopefully sooner rather than later, we actually have some real stuff to watch again.
By the way, real quick, I gave WrestleMania a B-. What did you give it?
Well, I didn't watch it. I actually edited 9,000 words that Russ and Coggin wrote for Crossing Broad. So everything that I got from WrestleMania came through that. But after reading 9,000 words about it, I felt like I could form the opinion that the Undertaker and AJ Styles thing was actually kind of creative.
It was very creative. That was actually one of the top ones I thought. My biggest problem with the WrestleMania had nothing to do with the crowd. It was just I felt like you ever watch like a television show and like you see a character and you see a scene and you're like, it's just unnecessary. That was a couple of the matches. It was like, we didn't really need this. We didn't really need this filler. Like we could have done without like some of this stuff. It felt like a great TV show that you love and you enjoy. And then like, there comes that character that nobody gives two bleeps about that's showing up on the show.
But again, it was like, it was something for wrestling fans to look forward to in a time when there really isn't a lot to look forward to. And I think the fact that they were able to go through with that in a safe way that really didn't endanger anybody, I think that was kind of a blueprint to say, well, why can't we do that with UFC, or why can't we do that with the NFL draft or whatever? So I don't know. Hopefully that means something to some people, and hopefully people can take that and then say, look, if we were able to do this, then maybe we can do this. 2 words: biosphere. That's right. We have coming to a sport near you. yeah, for sure. I'll watch pretty much anything at this point. Yeah. He is Kevin Kinkead. You can follow him on Twitter at Kevin_Kinkead, Crossing Broad. And he joined us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline. Kevin, appreciate the extended time today. Yeah, anytime, man. I'll talk to you. All right.